Your parents bought their first house when they were 28. They saved for 2 years, put down 10%, and their mortgage payment was less than what they'd been paying in rent. They weren't rich. Your dad was a teacher. Your mom worked part-time at an office. They had one car. They budgeted carefully, but they could afford a house. A 3-bedroom house with a yard in a decent neighborhood. And they did it on 1.5 incomes without family money or inheritance. Now you're 32. You have a bachelor's degree, which your parents didn't. You make more money than your dad did at your age, even adjusting for inflation. You're good with money. You budget, you save, you don't eat avocado toast or whatever the meme is. And you cannot afford to buy a house, not even close. You've been saving for 5 years, and you're not even halfway to a down payment. The houses in the neighborhoods where you grew up, the neighborhoods your parents could afford, now cost $700,000. Your parents paid $90,000 for the same house in 1985. If you've ever had a parent or a boomer tell you that you just need to work harder or save more, if you've ever felt like you're failing at something your parents did easily, if you've ever run the numbers and realized that homeownership isn't just hard, it's mathematically impossible on your income, this video is for you. Because your parents could buy a house and you can't. And it's not because you're worse with money. It's because the entire economic structure of housing changed. Today we're going to break down exactly what happened, why it happened, and what it means for your future. Let me tell you what this feels like, because if you're a millennial or Gen Z trying to buy a house, you know this frustration intimately. You sit down with a mortgage calculator. You plug in the numbers. Median home price in your city is $600,000. 20% down is $120,000. You make $70,000 per year. You're saving 10% of your gross income, which is $7,000 per year. At that rate, it'll take you 17 years to save the down payment. 17 years. You'll be almost 50 before you can buy your first house. And that assumes home prices don't go up, which they will, which means the down payment target keeps moving further away. So you look at FHA loans where you can put down 3.5%. That's $21,000. Still 3 years of saving. And then your mortgage payment will be $3,800 per month, plus mortgage insurance because you didn't put down 20%, so call it $4,000 per month. Your take-home pay is maybe $4,500 per month. A $4,000 mortgage would leave you $500 per month for food, utilities, transportation, healthcare, student loans, and every other expense. It's not doable. The math doesn't work. So you look at cheaper areas farther from the city, farther from jobs, farther from everything. Houses are cheaper there, maybe $400,000. But now you're commuting 2 hours each way. That's 4 hours per day in the car. 20 hours per week. That's a part-time job of just commuting. And gas, car maintenance, wear and tear. You're spending $300 more per month on transportation. You've saved $200 on the mortgage, but you're spending $300 more on commuting. You're going backwards. And you have no life. You leave at 6 in the morning. You get home at 8 at night. When do you see friends? When do you exercise? When do you live? So you stay renting. $1,800 per month for a 1-bedroom apartment. You're paying your landlord's mortgage, building their equity, accumulating nothing for yourself. And every year your rent goes up and you fall further behind on saving for a down payment. You feel trapped. You feel like you're failing at adulthood. And then your mom says, "Well, when your dad and I were your age, we just saved and bought a house. You should try that." And you want to scream. Here's what your parents don't understand, because they didn't have to understand it. The economics of housing are completely different now than they were in 1980 or 1990. Let me show you the math, because once you see these numbers, you'll understand why you're not failing. The game changed. In 1980, the median home price in the United States was $64,000. The median household income was $21,000. That's a price-to-income ratio of 3 to 1. Your parents needed to save 3 times their annual income to buy a median-priced house. And because interest rates were high but incomes were rising fast, they could actually do it. Let's say they made $21,000 per year and saved 10%. That's $2,100 per year. They needed $6,400 for a 10% down payment. That's 3 years of saving. 3 years. Not 17. 3. And their mortgage payment on the remaining $57,600, even at the high interest rates of the time, was maybe $600 per month. They were paying $1,500 in rent. The mortgage was cheaper than rent. They saved money by buying. Now let's look at today. The median home price in the United States is around $420,000. The median household income is around $75,000. That's a price-to-income ratio of 5.6 to 1. You need to save 5.5 times your annual income to buy a median-priced house. But it's worse than that, because in many desirable cities where jobs are, the ratio is 8 to 1 or 10 to 1. In expensive markets like San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York or Seattle, median homes are $800,000 to over $1 million. If you're making $100,000, which is a very good income, you'd need to save $800,000 to $1 million to buy a median home in those cities. Even with a 10% down payment, that's $80,000 to $100,000. On a $100,000 income, saving 10% per year, that's $10,000 per year. 8 to 10 years of saving. And that's if you're making $100,000, which most people aren't. If you're making the actual median income of $75,000, and the house costs $800,000, you're looking at more than a decade of saving for a down payment. But let's go deeper, because the price-to-income ratio is only part of the story. Your parents had high interest rates but low home prices. You have low to moderate interest rates but insanely high home prices. In 1980, mortgage rates were around 13%. That sounds terrible. But on a $64,000 house with 10% down, the mortgage on $57,600 at 13% is about $630 per month. Today, mortgage rates are around 7%, much lower. But on a $420,000 house with 10% down, the mortgage on $378,000 at 7% is about $2,500 per month. Your parents paid $600. You pay $2,500. 4 times as much in absolute dollars. And here's the kicker. $600 on a $21,000 income is about 34% of gross monthly income. $2,500 on a $75,000 income is 40% of gross monthly income. You're paying a higher percentage of your income than your parents did for a mortgage that's 4 times higher in dollars, to buy a house that costs 6 times more relative to income. Every single metric is worse for you. Now let's talk about down payments specifically, because this is where the generational wealth gap becomes stark. Your parents needed $6,400 for a 10% down payment on a $64,000 house. That's 3 months of gross income. 3 months. If they really buckled down, they could save that in a year. You need $42,000 for a 10% down payment on a $420,000 house. That's 6.5 months of gross income. But nobody saves their entire gross income. After taxes and basic living expenses, maybe you can save 10% if you're disciplined. So that $6,400 took your parents 2 to 3 years to save. That $42,000 will take you 5 to 7 years to save. And again, that's if home prices don't increase, which they do, at 3 to 5% per year. If home prices increase at 4% per year and you're saving for 7 years, by year 7, the house that cost $420,000 now costs $550,000. The down payment you were saving for is now obsolete. You need $55,000, not $42,000. You're chasing a moving target, and the target is moving faster than you can run. Let's add student loans to this picture, because this is another massive difference. Your parents probably didn't have student loans. College was cheap enough that you could work part-time and pay tuition, or take small loans that were manageable. The average student loan debt in 1980 was negligible. Today, the average student loan debt for borrowers is around $35,000. If you went to graduate school or a private university, it could be $60,000, $80,000, $100,000 or more. You're paying $300 to $600 per month in student loan payments. That's money that can't go toward saving for a house. Your parents didn't have that burden. They could put that $300 to $600 per month toward a down payment or a mortgage. You can't. You're starting with a debt anchor that they never had. And you needed that degree because the job market requires it now in a way it didn't in 1980. Your parents could get a middle-class job with a high school diploma. You need a bachelor's degree for the same job, and that degree costs you $35,000 in debt. Now let's look at wages versus costs. From 1979 to 2019, productivity, the amount of economic output per hour of work, increased about 65%. If wages had kept pace with productivity, the median worker would be making about $90,000 per year today instead of $75,000. That $15,000 gap per year over a career is enormous. Where did that extra productivity value go? It went to capital, to shareholders, to executives, to the top 1%. Workers became more productive, but they didn't capture the gains. Meanwhile, housing prices increased faster than everything. Median home prices increased about 400% from 1980 to today. Median incomes increased about 200%. Housing outpaced income by 2 to 1. And this isn't because houses got twice as good. The houses your parents bought are the same houses you're trying to buy. They didn't double in quality. They doubled in price because housing became an investment asset instead of just a place to live. Here's the system that created this. First, zoning and land use restrictions. Starting in the 1970s and accelerating in the 80s and 90s, cities and suburbs enacted increasingly restrictive zoning laws. Single-family zoning, minimum lot sizes, height restrictions, parking requirements, lengthy permitting processes. All of these make it harder and more expensive to build housing. When supply is restricted and demand grows, prices go up. This was intentional. Existing homeowners wanted their property values to increase. They lobbied for zoning restrictions that would limit new housing supply. Scarcity drives up prices. Your parents' generation bought homes, then pulled up the ladder by supporting policies that restricted new housing. Their home values went up, your ability to buy went down. The system worked exactly as designed, just not for you. Second, the financialization of housing. In the 1980s and 90s, housing increasingly became treated as an investment rather than a consumption good. Buy a house, watch it appreciate, extract equity through refinancing, use that to buy more property or fund retirement. This mentality turned housing into a wealth accumulation vehicle. And once housing is primarily an investment, the incentive is to make housing prices go up, not down. Investors, landlords, homeowners, they all want appreciation. But appreciation for them means unaffordability for you. When a house is $700,000 and appreciating at 5% per year, the owner is making $35,000 per year in wealth gains just from holding the asset. They didn't work for that. They didn't produce anything. They just owned. And that $35,000 in appreciation is being extracted from future buyers. You have to pay more because the house is worth more. The wealth transfer is from young people trying to buy to old people who already own. Third, interest rates and monetary policy. The Federal Reserve has kept interest rates historically low for most of the past 15 years to stimulate the economy. Low interest rates make borrowing cheap, which sounds good. But cheap borrowing means investors can borrow money to buy real estate and get positive returns. This floods the housing market with investor money. Private equity firms, real estate investment trusts, individual landlords, They're all buying properties with cheap borrowed money. They bid up prices. And they're not buying to live in the homes. They're buying to rent them out or hold them as appreciating assets. This reduces the supply of homes available to owner-occupants and increases prices. You're competing against investors with access to cheap capital. They can outbid you every time. And when interest rates do rise, like they did recently, it doesn't make housing more affordable. It just makes mortgages more expensive. Prices stay high because supply is still constrained. And now your monthly payment is even higher because rates are higher. You lose either way. Fourth, wage stagnation and the decline of labor power. Unions represented about 30% of workers in the 1950s. Now it's about 6%. Without collective bargaining, workers have no power to demand wage increases that match productivity or cost of living increases. Corporate profits are at record highs. Executive compensation is at record highs. Worker wages are stagnant. The median wage has barely increased in real terms since the 1970s. Meanwhile, the cost of housing, healthcare, and education have all dramatically outpaced inflation. You're making relatively the same as your parents did, but housing costs 3 to 5 times more relative to your income. This isn't an accident. This is the result of policy choices that favored capital over labor for 40 years. Fifth, the death of the single-income household. Your parents could buy a house on 1.5 incomes. One spouse working full-time, the other part-time or staying home. Now most families need 2 full-time incomes just to afford housing. Median home prices are based on dual-income households. If you're single, you're competing against couples who can combine incomes. If you're a couple, you're already combining incomes, and it's still not enough. The system now assumes and requires dual incomes for homeownership. But that means when both partners are working full-time, who's taking care of kids? Who's managing the household? You're paying for childcare, which is another huge expense your parents didn't face. Or you're exhausted trying to do everything. The system extracted more labor from families by requiring 2 incomes, but housing ate all the gains. Sixth, tax policy and subsidies. The mortgage interest deduction benefits people who already own homes, especially expensive homes. It's a tax break that costs the government about $25 billion per year and mostly goes to high-income homeowners. It doesn't help you buy your first home. It helps people who already own homes buy bigger homes or second homes. Meanwhile, there's virtually no comparable tax benefit for renters. The system subsidizes ownership for people who already own, and provides nothing for people trying to get into ownership. First-time homebuyer programs exist, but they're small, underfunded, and have strict income and price limits. The big money goes to existing owners. Seventh, corporate and foreign investment in housing. Corporations and foreign investors buy single-family homes as investment properties. In some markets, investors account for 20 to 30% of home purchases. These are properties that could have gone to owner-occupants. They're being bought by entities that will never live in them, only rent them out or hold them. This reduces supply for buyers and increases demand, driving up prices. And it creates a class of permanent renters. You can't compete with a corporation that's buying 100 homes at once with cash. You need a mortgage and you're buying one home. They outbid you. Then they rent it back to you at a profit. So where does this leave you? Your parents bought in an economy where housing was 3 times income, where saving for a down payment took 2 to 3 years, where mortgage payments were lower than rent, where a single income or 1.5 incomes was enough, where student debt didn't exist, where wages were rising, where housing was seen as a place to live rather than primarily an investment. You're buying in an economy where housing is 5 to 10 times income, where saving for a down payment takes 7 to 15 years or more, where mortgage payments are higher than rent, where 2 incomes are required, where student debt is the norm, where wages are stagnant, and where housing is treated as a financial asset. These are 2 completely different economies. Your parents succeeded in theirs. You're failing in yours not because you're less capable, but because the structure is fundamentally different and hostile to first-time buyers. What can you do? Let's start with individual strategies, knowing that these are band-aids on a systemic problem. First, if you can, get help from family. I know this is privilege and not everyone has it, but if your parents or grandparents can give or lend you down payment money, take it. This is how wealth transfers generationally. Homeowners help their kids buy, and those kids become homeowners and help their kids. If you don't have that, you're starting from scratch and the climb is much steeper. Second, consider house hacking. Buy a duplex or triplex, live in one unit, rent out the others. The rental income helps cover the mortgage. This requires a larger down payment for a multi-unit property, but FHA loans can work for up to 4 units if you're owner-occupying. Third, look at first-time homebuyer programs. Many states and cities offer down payment assistance or lower down payment requirements. These are often limited and have income caps, but if you qualify, use them. Fourth, consider buying with a partner or friends. Combining incomes makes homeownership more accessible. This comes with risks and complications, but it's increasingly common. Fifth, be willing to compromise on location, size, or condition. Your first home doesn't have to be your forever home. Buy a smaller place, a fixer-upper, something in a less desirable area. Build equity for 5 years, then sell and upgrade. Your parents did this too. The difference is their starter home costs 3 times income, yours costs 6. But the principle of starting small still applies. Sixth, increase your income aggressively. This is hard and not always possible, but every extra dollar you earn that you can put towards savings accelerates the timeline. Side hustles, job hopping for raises, skill building, career pivots. Optimize for income if homeownership is the goal. But here's the reality. Individual solutions can't solve a structural problem. Even if you do everything right, the system is stacked against you. Real solutions require policy changes. We need massive increases in housing supply, upzone cities, legalize multifamily housing, reduce parking requirements, streamline permitting, build hundreds of thousands of units per year. Supply is the only thing that will bring prices down relative to incomes. We need to tax speculative investment in housing. High taxes on vacant properties. Restrictions on corporate ownership of single-family homes. Limits on foreign investment. Make it less profitable to treat housing as a financial asset. We need to increase wages, strengthen unions, raise the minimum wage. Tie wages to productivity. Workers need to capture the value they create. We need to change the mortgage interest deduction into a first-time homebuyer credit. Stop subsidizing second homes for the wealthy and start helping first-time buyers. We need down payment assistance programs at scale, funded federally. If we can bail out banks and subsidize corporations, we can help young people buy homes. We need to build social housing. Public housing with mixed-income residents, well-maintained, destigmatized. Not as a last resort, but as a real option. Other countries do this successfully. We need rent control in the short term to stabilize costs while supply catches up. And we need to change the cultural narrative that housing must always appreciate. Housing appreciation is great for people who own. It's devastating for people trying to buy. We need an economy where housing is stable and affordable, not an ever-appreciating asset. Here's the truth your parents don't want to hear. They benefited from an economic structure that is no longer available to you. They bought when housing was affordable relative to incomes, when wages were rising, when single incomes worked, when debt wasn't required for education. Those conditions don't exist anymore. And many of them voted for policies that made housing more expensive because it benefited them. They supported zoning restrictions to protect their property values. They opposed new housing in their neighborhoods. They voted for tax cuts that reduced funding for affordable housing. They treated their homes as retirement accounts and expected endless appreciation. They pulled up the ladder. Not maliciously, not consciously, but through a series of choices that prioritize their wealth over your opportunity. And now they have the nerve to tell you that you're not working hard enough. You deserve an economy where hard work and responsible saving leads to homeownership like it did for your parents. You deserve housing that costs 3 to 4 times income, not 8 to 10. You deserve wages that keep pace with productivity. You deserve to not start your career with tens of thousands in student debt. You deserve to be able to buy a home in the city where you work without spending 4 hours per day commuting. None of this is radical. It's what your parents had. But getting it back requires acknowledging that the system changed, that it was changed deliberately through policy choices, and that it can be changed back through different policy choices. Your parents could buy a house and you can't because the economic rules changed. Housing became an investment instead of a necessity. Supply was restricted to drive up prices. Wages stagnated while costs soared. Debt became mandatory for education. 2 incomes became required for basic middle-class life. These changes didn't happen naturally. They happened because of decisions made by people in power, many of them from your parents' generation, that prioritized wealth accumulation for people who already had wealth over opportunity for people starting out. You're not failing. You're playing a rigged game. See it clearly. Name it honestly. Demand it be changed. Because you deserve the same shot at homeownership and wealth building that your parents had. And the only way to get it is to fight for the systemic changes that will make it possible. The house your parents bought for $90,000 is now worth $700,000. That's not natural appreciation. That's a policy-driven wealth transfer from your generation to theirs. It's time to stop blaming yourself for not being able to afford what's been deliberately made unaffordable, and start demanding an economy that works for workers, not just asset owners. Your parents had it. You deserve it too. Fight for it.